CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister fights for his political life as he tries to derail a coalition deal that could end his term in office.
Summer holiday hopes dashed as Portugal is removed from the UK's green travel list and no new countries are added.
Upcycling the recycling truck, the company electrifying classic cars and industrial vehicles.
And the long march continues. A herd of wild elephants trample their way into a major city in southwest China. Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister is fighting for his political life. Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been in power for 12 years, is urging lawmakers to oppose what he's described as a dangerous left-wing government.
His comments came after the leader of the centrist Yesh Atid party announced an 8-faction coalition had been formed. Stephanie Fried reports from Tel Aviv.
Change. That's the name and aim of Israel's newest coalition, made up of disparate partners whose ideologies range from conservative right to liberal left.
Mr. President, I am calling to say that I have formed a government.
The coalition's formation technically ends the term for Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and endeavors to unfreeze years of political stalemate.
We're in a rough economic state, a rough security state. There was no way a responsible adult wouldn't step in and say, enough is enough.
But in a country where governments last an average 2 of their 4-year tenures, future challenges are guaranteed. If approved by Israel's parliament, the new coalition will see Naftali Bennett, the pro-settlement leader of the far-right Yamina party, serve as prime minister for 2 years.
He'll be succeeded by centrist Yesh Atid party head Yair Lapid, but skeptics question whether the new government will survive long enough for Lapid to move into the prime minister position.
Political orientations among coalition partners run the gamut, from Arab members of the Islamic movement's political wing to right-wing politicians opposed to Palestinian statehood. Change coalition leaders will reportedly avoid charged issues like settlement, Palestinian statehood, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a year. They'll focus instead on neglected education, infrastructure, and health programs, and pass a long-absent state budget. Benjamin Netanyahu vows he'll continue fighting as he stands trial on corruption charges and moves to the opposition. But with the advent of the new coalition, his position has substantially weakened. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
World health leaders are meeting in Oxford, hoping to reach a deal to help reduce the risks of global pandemics and other threats to health. G7 ministers want to improve early detection of animal-borne diseases and ensure poorer nations get more access to COVID vaccines. Andrew Wilson is in Oxford, where the talks are taking place. Andrew, let's start with these new travel restrictions from the United Kingdom. What's been announced?
Yeah, the atmospherics aren't too good for this G7 meeting. Not only the leaders next week in Cornwall on the beach in the southwest, but also this week, the G7 health ministers meeting ahead of that. All these delegates have flown in, and the first bit of news they're picking up on in the UK is that the last remaining holiday destination, Portugal, has been taken off the green travel list. So now there are no places, apart from Israel or Iceland and a few other isolated islands around the world, for UK holidaymakers to go where they can travel to the destination and come back without going into quarantine. And that makes the atmospheric slightly different, because only a few weeks ago, of course, in the UK, there was an abundance of confidence around the vaccination programme, and that was going to be the centre stage, the conversation stopper of the G7 gathering. Now, of course, there's a lot of talk about variants and concerns about caution and overconfidence and what these variants are doing to the different countries around the world and the different balancing acts that people are having to do with travel. So the camera's caught up with the Health Secretary, who's hosting this conference in Oxford today, and of course the tone in this government, Minister, was to many depressingly familiar.
Well, we do have to be careful about international travel, and the Delta variant is just one new variant, another new variant, and it shows why it's right to be careful about international travel. And countries around the world have learnt the importance of that, including us here in the UK. So that's something we look at very carefully, and I fully respect the fact that my counterparts across the world also look very carefully at that sort of at international travel, and they're right to do so.
Andrew, the G7 summit is underway. What's being discussed?
Well, the dynamics this year, of course, are important for many reasons, principally surrounding the pandemic. There was a very large agenda already agreed ahead of time: global health security, antimicrobial resistance, the dangers of antibiotics, the importance of robust clinical trials, not only for vaccines, but also for therapies like dexamethasone, which is now proving successful around the world, digital health and so on. But I think more vaccines are going to dominate the discussions both today and tomorrow amongst the health ministers. Vaccine production and vaccine hesitancy. Production, there's a large push now, and that's been backed recently by Washington as well, for other countries to be allowed to produce the popular vaccines like AstraZeneca and Pfizer and Moderna under license in their own countries. Germany and the UK are still pretty much set against it. They don't think it's a reliable way to proceed, but other countries, including the United States, are now all for it. And that's going to be all the more significant. But this year, the UK has invited some other guest countries who will be participating in Cornwall next week, but will also have health ministers joining into this debate remotely to the team in Oxford. And that's Australia, India, South Korea and South Africa. And a lot of those two countries, particularly India and South Africa, really have a dog in the fight of vaccine panic. And we'll be looking at all sorts of possibilities that they can latch onto in the discussions going on in Oxford. So I think, really, given the state of where the variants are and that demonstrable change in the UK travel plans, it's rearing its head as being a long-term problem. And that's going to focus minds, I think, at the meetings this week in Oxford and next week in Cornwall.
Andrew Wilson in Oxford, many thanks.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, a blow for Hungary at Europe's top court. Could the country lose its EU voting rights?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As as we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube in Daily Motion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Now, it can be used from everything from paying taxes to renting bikes. The European Commission has unveiled its so-called digital wallet, which allows the EU's 450 million citizens to identify themselves and store documents, such as driving licenses and medical prescriptions. For more, let's head to Brussels and Tony Waterman. So, what does it do and how does it work?
Well, Paul, this is essentially, these digital wallets would essentially consolidate a person's personal and also official documents into one single verified digital identity. And it would be capable of storing things, like you said, important documents, your licenses, your health information, your marriage certificate, your university diploma. But it would also serve as a vault for stashing your credit card details and your passwords. And Brussels really envisions this being used on simple things like paying your electricity bill, but also on more complicated things like getting a loan or renting a flat. And there are more than half of the member states right now which already are using EIDs in some form, but these are all disparate systems. They're not talking to one another. So the plan here is to link them all up so that this system could be seamlessly used across Europe. Take a listen to what Marguerite Vestager had to say when announcing this earlier.
This is about having the option to identify yourself in a digital way, not only in your country if you have an e-identity, but also in other member states. And that will make a lot of things easier. But it is basically the same thing as taking your identity on paper and showing it. Only now much easier, faster.
In terms of how this is going to work, these wallets are going to be apps. So you will download it onto your smartphone the way you would any other app, and it would be accessible by a biometric, your fingerprint, perhaps a retinal scan. This is stuff that's already happening, we know, at airports in a lot of different places. And using the digital wallet is not going to be mandatory for people, but the Commission is going to oblige member states to build these platforms, to offer them to their citizens, and also to recognize them from other countries as early as late next year. And certain sectors like telecommunications, utilities, banking sectors, they are going to be required to recognize these EIDs, as well as some very big platforms like Facebook and Google.
So not mandatory, but why is the EU so keen to get its citizens on board with this?
Well, the pandemic has really pushed things along here. We know that in the last year and a half or so, when people have been at home, that a lot of services have shifted online. So that's one reason. The EU is also already working on a block-wide verification system right now, and that is the EU COVID certificate to ease travel across the bloc this summer. And also the Pandemic Recovery Fund, that $1 trillion fund, has earmarked billions of dollars for member states for their digital transformation. So this could actually help accelerate that process and could create a lot of new demand. Brussels says that these digital wallets could perhaps create 27,000 new jobs over the course of the next 5 years. This is also a way for Europeans to gain more control over their personal data. The this digital wallet could be an alternative to the very popular ones already on the market right now from Apple and Google, but it would be that users, the big difference would be that the users would decide what information is stored in these wallets and how much data is actually shared with third parties. So if you are at a bar, you're a young person, you need to verify how old you are. Right now, you hand over your ID and it has all this information that's completely irrelevant, your address, your height. I know in the U.S. they even have your eye color on there. It's not pertinent to the situation. So this ID would be a way to just verify your age and then leave all of that other information out so other people can't gain access to it. So that addresses, of course, some of the privacy concerns that we're seeing right now. But when it comes to actually the trade-off being that when you start compiling all of this personal and financial data, it becomes a prime target for hackers. And the Commission actually saying today it's going to be left up to the wallet providers to make sure that that information is safe.
OK, thanks very much, Tony. Tony Waterman there in Brussels. Well, the European Commission's Vice President also spoke about spying claims. Earlier this week, it was reported that Denmark's military helped the US seek intelligence on leading European politicians, including Germany's Angela Merkel. Margrethe Vestager's office has already said she did not oversee any intelligence services during her time as Interior Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, a point she made during Thursday's news conference.
I think I've always held this view that, no, you should not spy on your neighbours.
Hungary has suffered a blow in Europe's highest court, losing its challenge to overturn action by the European Parliament, which accused the country of eroding democratic standards. Penelope Leash has more from Budapest.
This legal process relates back to a decision made in 2018 because of concerns around the way Hungary has been governed. Issues relating to the constitution, electoral process, independence of the judiciary, conflicts of interest and corruption have all been highlighted as areas of concern. Losing this challenge means Hungary could face sanctions now that the EU member states can hold the Budapest government to account. At the time, a proposal with a two-thirds majority found Hungary posed a clear risk of a serious breach of EU principles, including the rule of law. This triggered a clause which provides for the most serious political sanction the bloc can impose on a member country and could lead to Hungary's voting rights being suspended. Only Poland has faced a similar situation. Hungary's court challenge was based on the way votes were counted in 2018, arguing if abstentions had been included, it would mean the result may have been different. However, the EU Court of Justice on Thursday ruled the European Parliament had followed correct procedure. Hungary cannot appeal this decision. Reacting to the result on social media, Hungary's Justice Minister called it shocking and inadmissible, but says Hungary is ready for a dialogue on issues related to the rule of law in the spirit of loyal cooperation. Despite run-ins with the European Union, it's unlikely Hungary or Poland will lose their voting rights, as that would require 26 of 27 member countries to agree, and both have agreed to protect each other. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Budapest.
Europe's top court has also ruled in favour of thousands of Tesco supermarket workers in a case over equal pay. The decision by the European Court of Justice means the British chain faces a bill of around $3.5 billion in back pay to as many as 25,000 female employees. The case is the latest against a number of big UK supermarkets. Female workers won the first stage of a lawsuit against Asda back in March.
And in another major ruling, Europe's highest court says Germany persistently violated EU limits on air pollution. The Court of Justice said that from 2010 to 2016, Germany breached European Union annual limits on nitrogen dioxide levels in 26 areas. It found the German government had failed to take steps to comply with European air quality rules.
The French government has summoned the head of the Orange telecom operator after a major malfunction prevented calls to emergency services. The outage lasted several hours on Wednesday afternoon and is alleged to have caused the deaths of at least 3 people. The Interior Ministry called the incident serious and unacceptable.
France's planned pension reforms have been put on hold. President Emmanuel Macron says the controversial changes can't go ahead as planned in the wake of the pandemic. The reforms were suspended in March last year. Macron says fears sparked by the health crisis can't be ignored. He made the comments in Lot in southwest France as part of a 6-week political tour.
The Czech government looks set to survive a no-confidence vote after a key opposition group pulled out of a cross-party coalition. The Czech Communist Party has called for new elections, but it said it would not take part in attempts to overthrow the minority cabinet of Prime Minister Andrej Babis. The government has been at the centre of a spying scandal and has been criticised for its handling of the pandemic.
The US has imposed new sanctions on Bulgarian individuals and companies for alleged corruption and links to Russia. Former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov has welcomed the charges against 3 Bulgarian nationals, but denied any wrongdoing by his administration. 64 companies are also sanctioned in what the US Treasury Department says is the single biggest action against corruption in Bulgaria to date.
Denmark has passed a law allowing it to relocate asylum seekers to partner countries outside of the EU. The migrants would then have their cases reviewed and possibly obtain protection in those countries. The UN and lobby groups have urged Denmark to abandon the plan.
Russia's chief finance minister has warned of a rise in the cost of borrowing soon, as last month's inflation figures jumped to 5.9% ahead of analysts' expectations. Anton Siluanov says further steps may be necessary to rein in spending, while the Russian economy continues to feel the effects of the COVID pandemic. JP Morgan has applied to take full ownership of its securities joint venture on the Chinese mainland. The Wall Street Bank currently owns 71% of the business after buying out one of its Chinese partners last year. China scrapped foreign ownership limits in the securities sector last April, allowing more access for international players in its financial industry. An increasing number of foreign banks are looking to increase direct ownership of Chinese-based ventures. Wei-Ling Tang explains why it's important for China's financial strategy.
Shanghai already houses the world's top 10 asset management institutions. And the removal of foreign ownership limits in China since April 1st, 2020 has paved the way for more to enter the market.
China is opening, and the cross-border connectivity is an important part to continue sustaining the significant growth of China. And it is not just about attracting the capital inflow, but actually the infrastructural support, right, and enablers behind that.
One example of this infrastructure comes in the form of domestic fund custody licenses.
When one mentions fund management, what comes to mind usually is the buying and selling of stocks, bonds, and other assets to generate returns. Now, what a custodian does is this. According to Deutsche Bank, custodians provide post-trade services for its institutional clients, and this includes clearing and settlement, client and regulatory reporting, as well as investment compliance monitoring solutions.
Previously, we only focus on bilateral investments, so the scope is kind of limited if you consider the size of the domestic market. So now with this license, we'll be able to provide the local custody and the clearing and the valuation to our local clients. With the relaxation of the China capital markets, we will be able to apply for more and more licenses.
Deutsche Bank was granted a domestic fund custody license in December 2020, making it only the third foreign player after Citibank and Standard Chartered to do so. For some perspective, there are about 50 custodians on the mainland. Previously, this space was occupied by local players.
It's a scalable business, and we also see it as a platform to build and grow our client relationship. So once we identified the client needs other than custody, we will connect the clients with our other piece of the business, so we create more cross-selling and group synergy.
Over a week ago, the Shanghai municipal government issued guidelines setting its sights on the city to become a leading global asset management center by 2025.
So we are talking about US 20 trillion AUM in the market, but behind that is just starting to the whole structural transformation from the shadow banking landscape towards the professional asset management. So as you can imagine, a lot of the underlying fund administrative and also the custodian capability, right, that also need to keep up the pace to serve the whole transformation of the industry.
This transformation is needed as more complex product structures and asset classes enter China. And in the longer term, Ray says the local Chinese players will also need to elevate their capabilities to support these different types of capital. Wei-Ling Tang, CGTN, Shanghai.
China and the United States have resumed discussions on economic and trade issues, with China saying they're continuing to seek common ground. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is holding further talks with China's Vice Premier Liu He. China's Commerce Ministry says both countries will continue to meet, and the next talks will focus on solving specific issues for producers and consumers.
And revving up the green drive. German carmaker BMW says its factories in China will aim to be carbon neutral by the end of the year, while total emissions in its Chinese production chain will fall by 80% over the next decade. The company is also aiming for a quarter of its Chinese sales to be electric by 2025.
China has voiced concern over the safety of children's items imported by a number of Western brands, including H&M, Zara and Nike. The country's Customs Administration listed more than 80 items on its website, including clothing, toys and shoes. Authorities say they have detected harmful substances that can be absorbed through close contact.
Well, yesterday we reported on the $1.6 billion takeover of second-hand fashion app Depop. And that was by its much bigger rival Etsy. Now, analysts say the market for recycled goods is set to boom in the post-COVID world, with more consumers than ever shopping online. To find out more about the pre-loved clothing trend, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Coming up on CGTN, cinema giant AMC says it's selling more shares as trading booms, but is a crash on the way?
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and me, Juliet Mann. Our headlines again. Israel's Prime Minister fights for his political life as he tries to derail a coalition deal that could end his term in office.
And UK summer holiday hopes are dashed as Portugal is removed from the UK's green travel list and no new countries are added. To Wall Street now, and figures just out show the number of Americans filing new unemployment claims has hit its lowest level since the start of the pandemic. Let's cross now to New York and John Terrett. John, how much of a surprise are these figures?
Well, hey there, Paul. You know, the figures I think certainly were surprising in the sense that they're the best we've seen since the pandemic broke out well over a year ago. Let me just remind you what these figures are and where they fit into the big picture here. First of all, they are the weekly jobless claim. So in other words, it's the number of people signing up for first-time unemployment benefit up to last Saturday. Now, sometimes people sign up for the very first time. Sometimes people drop off and they come back because they need to, and that's included in the first-time signing. So that's what happened. And today, the figure was published, and it was below 400,000 for the very first time since the pandemic broke. So the claims are now down 35% since April, and today's figure is 385,000. That's a decline of 20,000 on the previous week. Now, obviously, it's still a very grim figure. It's not a good figure to have 385,000 people claiming first-time unemployment benefit, and it is, in my opinion, roughly double where it is under normal circumstances. So we're still not quite there just yet. Now, what is happening here is that roughly half the 50 states in the country are cutting back now on the enhanced unemployment benefit that people have been getting. So if you claim unemployment benefit, and it's only a short-term thing in America anyway, I think it's 13 weeks normally, but they've extended it because of the pandemic. If you claim it, you get roughly $300 a week in benefit and then an enhanced $300 on top. So that's about $600 a week, which people have been getting. And this all speaks to the labor shortage that is now going on here. We had the Federal Reserve publishing their beige book yesterday, which is just that. It's a beige book, and it's an indication of what they think where the economy is. They noted growth in economy. They noted the dangers of inflation in the economy, and they also noted the difficulty that people are having now around the country in filling jobs. There's about 80 million vacant posts at the moment around the country. Now, we're going into Friday here. It's Thursday lunchtime here. Friday we'll have the big jobs report. That is the biggest piece of economic data published anywhere in the world. It's the monthly jobs report for the month of May. And you will remember that in the month of April there was a big disappointment because we were expecting 1 million jobs to be added and we got 266,000. Now the reasons for that were given at the time: health concerns, childcare concerns, and apparently, it's a difficult thing to say really, but apparently people just not wanting to go back to work because they had all that money, $1,400 stimulus checks and the enhanced benefits that I was just talking about. So the enhanced benefits are being trimmed back, and therefore, when we get to the big jobs report on Friday, people are expecting there to be more than 266,000 jobs added as there were in April. I hope that's all clear, Paul.
Very clear. Clear as a bell, as ever, John. Let's talk about AMC. What's the latest on the price of this cinema chain that's causing such a stir? Tell us a bit more.
Well, we're going to do this more in detail in the programme before we finish at the top of the hour. Someone is going to come on who understands the retail investor mentality. So let me just set this up for you by saying that AMC is a movie chain of movie theatres. That's all it is. So their business, can't really grow all that much. They just play movies. They have 1,000 theatres around the country, 10,000 screens, because they have multi-screen cinemas, of course. They are saddled with debt, and they face very strong competition from streaming. Now, that's all I'm going to say. Let's look at the actual share price, because there is a battle going on, just as there was with GameStop back in February, between the professionals here, and some of them, of course, who are not actually based here, who are trading options. I assume they want the price to go down. I assume this is short selling. I don't really know. But the retail traders, the so-called Reddit crowd, are just piling into AMC big time. And there's no real reason for it, certainly not the fundamentals of the business. So what do we have? Yesterday, it hit an all-time... first of all, AMC is up 3,000% since the beginning of the year, its share price. 3,000%. And remember what I said about its business not really being able to expand very much. Yesterday it was up 120%, 107% and 101%. Those were my own observations. And it closed up 95%. And today it is down 31% at $44.21. So $62 at the close last night, $44 now. And the other big news, as you said in the intro, is that AMC is selling about 11 million brand new shares to make money for themselves because apparently so many people want to buy them. Sometimes you just have to end by saying, well, go figure.
Go figure indeed. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Thanks so much, John. John Terrett there on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Juliet.
Oh, go figure and proceed with caution, perhaps. You know, as John was saying, AMC trading's been halted several times as amateur traders grab the stock in huge volumes. The cinema chain has been the centre of this so-called meme craze that's seen retail investors trying to outwit Wall Street. And the frenzy is the latest example of a so-called army of small investors who congregate on online platforms like YouTube, Twitter and Reddit. Now, AMC almost doubled in value on Wednesday, its CEO offering free popcorn to even the smallest shareholder. And as John was saying, you know, they struggled to turn a profit last year with the cinemas closed because of lockdown. Major hedge funds bet billions that the shares would fall. But instead, that social media campaign by those amateur traders is driving a price boom. It's now up 1,400% since the start of the year. I mean, just take a look at that jump. My goodness, that's a huge amount. So let's talk to Andy Lee, a retail investor and one of the individuals behind what's going on at AMC. He joins us now from Taipei. And Andy, you were nodding away sagely there in the background to what John was saying.
To John and Paul, and you.
Go, Paul. I mean, I think first of all, you know, what is meme investing all about?
Well, it's about investing in the stock that you love and you support it with all you've got. Like, for example, buying the shares, buy and hold. That's what we apes do, Juliet.
You call yourself an ape. This is a primal thing, a planet of the apes. Just explain for our listeners.
Oh, that's very good. Planet of the Apes. Yes, we retail investors who invest in AMC and GameStop, we call ourselves apes because we are simple-minded and we are stubborn. We buy and hold, and that's all that we do. We're not bulls going long. We're not bears going short. We buy and hold. We are apes. That's what we call ourselves, Juliet.
And how long have you been doing this kind of influencer investing?
Well, I invest myself, I share what I do, and other people make up their own minds. I do not try to influence others. I've been doing this for 3 or 5 years already.
And you know, you say you're not trying to influence others, but you're investing in what you love. But you know what? The higher the price of something goes, that the further it could fall. I mean, there's got to be that temptation to profit take, to get out there quick. I mean, what's more of a buzz for you, that risk or the squeeze that you're giving institutional investors?
Right, that's a very good question, Juliet. What buzzed me? The squeeze we're talking about, it's because us retail investors are sharing on the social media platform that this is a good old company that has been shorted by hedge funds. Now, we don't like what the hedge funds are doing. These are good old companies that we love. Video games bought at GameStop, going to the movies, AMC. We want these companies to stick around. We don't want these companies to be shorted by hedge funds and then go bankrupt and then go to the grounds. We want them to stick around. We don't want them to go into oblivion. So we support these good old companies by buying their shares, going against the hedge funds, shorting good companies, providing decent jobs. Juliet.
But when you see that share price go up and up and up, you must be thinking, right, that's my pension, that's my kids' college fees, I'm gonna cut my losses.
It's called profit taking. We tend to do that at some point, but each of us have our own price in mind, life-changing price in mind. So I cannot speak for others, but I do have to take some profit taken at some time, at some point. I mean, what goes up must come down, right, Julia?
Right, okay, so how long is this party going to go on for? At what point are you going to say, you said you can't speak for others, but I want to know what your limit is. But hang on a minute, I thought you shared all of this with your community online. Share it with us.
Yes, I do share, but I don't talk about price predictions. I don't talk about timelines because each of us have our own price prediction and timelines. As for me, I just want the share price to go up to a life-changing profit-taking level. That's it. That's all I can say.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. You're making it sound a lot of fun rather than playing around with other people's money. So it's great talking to you. And next time we speak, maybe we can talk about regulation too. Great talking to you, Andy.
Yes, we'll do. Regulations required, definitely. Thank you, Judith.
Diplomats from China and Europe have ramped up engagement in recent weeks, trying to overcome differences and find common ground. It comes after the ratification of a major investment deal was shelved by the European Parliament following tit-for-tat sanctions. Earlier, I spoke with Jörg Wuttke, the president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, and asked him for his take on the situation.
Well, you know, Europe is selling 500 million euro of products to China every day, and China is sending 1 billion euro of products to Europe every day. That means both nations like each other's products, but of course the relationship goes beyond just trading of goods, and it has been incredibly stable for quite a long while.
In this post-Trump era, is the rhetoric between China and the EU now veering towards the rational, or are feelings still running quite high?
Well, we were very proud in December that we got this investment agreement signed, sealed, not yet delivered. We had the geographic indicator finalized in 2022, real good achievements, by the way, against the US wishes. But now, of course, since the sanctions were in place in March, we're a little bit in the doghouse, and we have to see how we crawl out of that. But again, China compartmentalizes it. We have a little bit more of toxic air among the politicians, but business on the ground is just doing fine.
So what is the future of the EU-China investment deal? Is there a way out of the current deadlock?
I don't see it anytime soon, frankly. It's very difficult for politicians to step down from that. There's no exit ramp. Very easy to impose sanctions, very difficult to get rid of them. Just look at Russia, Europe. So I guess if we succeed in not actually adding more sanctions to the sanctions, that's step one. Cooling off is step two, and then see where we can find more common ground on climate change, on biodiversity, in order to regain trust. But that's going to take a while.
So with these visits from Serbia, Hungary, Poland and Ireland, what is it in particular that these countries are interested in?
Well, the four countries are small players in the trade between Europe and China. I mean, keep in mind that 50% of all European exports to China come from one country only, Germany. But again, it's good that people meet. It's good that people talk. The significance definitely is more on the agriculture side. Ireland has a trade surplus with China, one of the very few countries, and certainly they're interested in order to maintain that or even go into high-tech such as aviation. And the others are certainly interested of having China supporting them in infrastructure projects.
Sri Lanka could be facing its worst environmental disaster after a cargo ship carrying chemicals caught fire off the coast and sunk. The blaze on the Express Pearl started 2 weeks ago and the crew was quickly evacuated. But as Nicole Johnston reports, the region's fishing waters are now at risk of an oil spill.
After 2 weeks engulfed in flames, this is the cargo ship as it sunk into the sea on Wednesday, taking with it 25 tonnes of nitric acid and 78 tonnes of plastic pellets, which are now contaminating Sri Lanka's fishing zone. The fear is a massive oil spill could be only hours away.
If the ship sinks, the oil on board will leak into the ocean and the beach, and our fishermen will lose their jobs. We cannot allow that.
Fishing has been suspended along an 80-kilometre stretch of coast, affecting thousands of fishermen.
The ship has dealt a blow to our lives. We can't go to the sea, which means we can't make a living.
Navy divers are preparing for the worst. The ship was carrying 350 tonnes of fuel. Savage crews tried to board the ship before it sunk and drag it into deeper water, but in the end had to give up when the ship hit the seabed.
There are two possibilities. Either all the fuel has caught fire or the oil could still be there. If the oil is still there, we have already taken precautionary steps to handle that situation in case there is a leak.
Non-biodegradable plastic pellets are choking the beaches. The cleanup has started.
3 containers we know fell into the ocean, which contain what we call nurdles, which are small plastic pellets. Our modeling says that these pellets will basically, in about 40 to 50 days, will probably end up in Indonesia. When the monsoon changes, it'll come back to Sri Lanka, to India, Maldives, Somalia.
And the rich fishing zone off Sri Lanka appears to have suffered a blow so severe it could take decades to recover. Nicole Johnston, CGTN.
China is hosting high-level talks with Afghanistan and Pakistan on finding a peaceful resolution to the Afghan conflict. Beijing, Kabul and Islamabad are calling for a responsible and orderly withdrawal of foreign troops. Speaking on other issues, all three foreign ministers expressed willingness to enhance the Belt and Road Initiative and to work together to fight terrorism. China says it's also committed to helping Pakistan and Afghanistan fight the pandemic. While conflict, coronavirus and unemployment are pushing Afghans to the brink. More than a third of the population is facing a food crisis, and the economy has gone into decline following a rise in Taliban attacks. Jack Barton now looks at the state of the Afghan economy and whether a peace deal could herald a fresh start.
A dairy factory in Mazar-e-Sharif, northern Afghanistan. It provides income for up to 4,000 dairy farmers and stable employment for the men and women who work here.
We can change my life by working in this company because this company have a lot of opportunity, especially the security and also environment is so satisfactory.
This is a rare sight in Afghanistan, and it's only been made possible because of the relative security here in Mazar. Elsewhere in the country, the economy remains in disarray. Even the capital, Kabul, has not been spared.
Day after day, there are suicide attacks and explosions. Once an explosion happens, everyone flees. Work dies for a week, 2 weeks, or even 3.
Since 2019, the economy has been shrinking. There were periods of strong growth before that, but most of it was linked to a lifeline of tens of billions of dollars in international aid filtering through a few hands.
The economic growth has not led to a decrease in poverty, so income inequality stays the same, poverty grows larger, and it hasn't translated into decrease in unemployment, which makes the Afghan economy different from the rest of the world.
Another difference is the booming black market in metals, precious stones and opium, with most tax revenues going to the Taliban.
The only thing it is not translating into is the government revenue.
More than 90% of the official national budget still comes from foreign aid. A peace deal could change all of that. On top of abandoned farm fields and businesses, the untapped potential revenue from shuttered mines is estimated at around $3 trillion. But attacks and instability are only escalating as both the Afghan government and the Taliban attempt to strengthen their negotiating hands ahead of a potential peace deal that all Afghans hope will be reached.
I hope that in the future we will reach to a peace, and the peace talk will successful, so this country will become a very good country in the future.
Until then, this factory represents a glimpse of what Afghanistan might look like if 4 decades of war can be brought to an end. Jack Barton, CGTN, Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan.
You're watching Global Business. Still ahead, a herd of wild elephants hits the road through an urban jungle, trampling into a major Chinese city.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. NASA is planning to return to Venus for the first time in more than 30 years. The US Space Agency is planning 2 new missions between 2028 and 2030 to study Earth's closest neighbour. The missions will measure Venus's atmosphere and map the planet's surface to discover why it developed so differently to Earth.
Soccer star David Beckham has taken a 10% stake in British firm Lunaz, which converts classic cars into electric ones. The company already restores Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Jaguars and Bentley Continentals with re-engineered sustainable luxury materials. It now plans to expand its upcycling and electrification programme to industrial vehicles on a global scale. I spoke to the CEO, David Lorenz.
At Lunaz, we take what already exists, whether it's heavy goods vehicles, commercial vehicles, or passenger vehicles, and we re-engineer these vehicles for a future. We do not build new vehicles. So when you look at all of the commercial vehicles on our roads today, every one of those vehicles can be converted to an electric vehicle and processed for future generations to come. And it is really key that we don't just look at scrapping all of these vehicles. You know, when you account for the 2 billion vehicles which are on this planet, and we transition to an EV future, we have to address what do we do with these vehicles, and we cannot scrap these vehicles. We have to look at re-engineering some of these vehicles for our future.
Hasn't a big issue for electric vehicles been range? You know, how far they can go without recharging? And if you're talking about refuse trucks and fire engines and juggernauts transporting goods across continents, you're going to need a very big battery.
So what's key when looking at various vehicles, and we really specialise in special vehicle classes like refuse trucks, they have duty cycles, and we analyse the duty cycles of every council, borough, government, and understand what duty cycle does that vehicle need. And what you've got to understand is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, as with new EVs that they're building. We can tailor a vehicle for a specific need. So refuse trucks, for example, do an average in the UK from 47 to 70 miles, depending on whereabouts the vehicle is placed. Now, we can build that vehicle for that duty cycle. There is no need to have excessive battery weight and cost attached to that vehicle. So it really is key that we look at vehicles that we can understand the mileage on those vehicles and build the required vehicle for the end user.
You mentioned cost there, and much of what you do is bespoke, and you've got a proven track record of converting luxury classics like Range Rovers, Bentleys and Rolls-Royce limousines to electric. So how are you going to scale things up while keeping things affordable?
We always understood we were going to go into the commercial front. We started with Lunaz Design, producing the world's first electric Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Range Rovers and Jaguar sports cars. And we've gone into production with every one of those vehicles. So we now have a production line of every one of those vehicle classes. The same goes for what we're doing in the commercial space. We're building the prototypes of multiple vehicle classes and then going into production with that vehicle, starting with the Mercedes E-Conic.
You mentioned scrapping there, but isn't there an argument that it might be better to start from scratch and design new EV-HGVs rather than converting them?
So when you look at the new EV alternatives coming out with the various brands, they are the identical refuse truck to what already exists. And what is key is to not build new when you're bringing over the same bumpers, components, window mechanisms, windscreens. All of these components are spectacular. The OEMs are just putting out the same truck with a powertrain. And we've got to understand that the build new mentality is not good for the environment. We carry over 70, as a minimum, 70% of the components which already have embedded carbon into them. Strip that vehicle down and re-engineer it and rebuild it from the ground up so it is as factory new.
So what next to get on the road that you see the business going in?
We're really specialised in special vehicle classes, so we're starting with refuse trucks, but we're looking at airport vehicles and across the board of different multiple classes. You know, and we are going to strategically place our locations around where there is demand. And you'll see Luna's growing in multiple different markets for years to come.
Finally, a herd of wild elephants have arrived in Kunming, the provincial capital of southwest China's Yunnan province. The 15 elephants have been on the move for days, forcing the evacuation of some villages. Marker has this report.
Now I'm in the Jingning district of Kunming, where the elephant has entered a walnut garden village around yesterday afternoon. That is their pass. As you can see, local traffic police have set up some roadblocks to avoid vehicles and unrelated personnel from entering this village. But unlike what they did for the other visits, they didn't do much damage to the properties and persons of the villagers. So that is what's lucky. As we've learned from China Fire and Rescue, they've dispatched at least 12 surveillance drones to keep track of the elephant's latest movement. But as you know, they rest during day in the forest and probably just somewhere in these mountains to avoid the heat, and they move at night. As the elephant herd pushes north and heading to the downtown area of Kunming, that has raised a lot of concerns of people living in Kunming and nearby villages. So what has been done at this moment are basically two things. The first is to set up so-called food sheds or food trucks to give the elephants what they want, that is food. So elephants like to eat pineapples, radishes and corns, and at least 16 tons of these vegetables have been fed to this herd so far. And the second thing that's been done by local forestry authorities is to set up roadblocks by using excavators and muck trucks filled with stones so that the elephants will be redirected to unpopulated areas.
Mark, there, it's just amazing, the story, isn't it? We've been covering it for days, and we don't know if it's a coincidence, but Kunming is pretty resonant, isn't it, this year?
That's right, you're right. I mean, they're a bit ahead of schedule, but in October we've got the UN Biodiversity Conference that's taking place in Kunming, so maybe they know something we don't. But it is incredible, isn't it? Because they can't seem to be diverted, and they don't want people to get in the way because they're wild animals. Extraordinary pictures.
They love pineapples and radishes.
It's a little bit like you on your diet, Paul. It is, isn't it?
Well, they say elephants are wise, so they're there for a reason. And yeah, that Kunming event's going to be a big.
I think it's putting a spotlight on Kunming.
Yep, and it's going to be a big event for CGTN. So do stay tuned for that later in the year. Well, our main stories again. Israel's Prime Minister is fighting for his political life as he tries to derail a coalition deal that could end his 12-year term in office. Benjamin Netanyahu is urging lawmakers to oppose what he's described as a dangerous left-wing government.
And UK summer holiday hopes have been dashed as Portugal's removed from the country's green travel list and no new countries are added. Major airlines have described it as disappointing and confusing news and are asking the government to include more destinations as soon as possible.
And that is Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories, as always, at europe.cgtn.com. And follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find this on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well, of course, as cgtn.com and the CGTN app.
Up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live, but we'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From us and the rest of the team in London. Goodbye.
Goodbye.